This is Sarah Brings with the Professor Podcast, the podcast of your professors, their research, and their academic lives here at St. Thomas. This week, we are delighted to have with us Nick Doten, Program Manager for Military Benefits and Compliance and current doctoral candidate for Doctor of Education in Educational Leadership. All right, Nick, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So to begin, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how that led to you to your current position here at St. Thomas?
Yes. Well, working in higher education was not something that I ever imagined that I would end up doing. I was a first-generation college student, and I actually I started off going to college at a community college, and I promptly dropped out after my first semester. Came back for the next year, dropped out again, was in for a year, transferred schools, dropped out a third time, had a lot of issues figuring out what financial aid looked like, and didn't have a lot of the skills that were, really useful to helping keep me in college. I was a decent enough student, but I was content with kind of working, similar sorts of jobs as my parents. The goal was to get a decent union job and kind of just go from there and see where life took me. But my parents, despite not being college educated themselves, they kept kind of pushing me like, hey, remember college, let's not forget about that. And I kept finding my way back to it from there, never imagining that I would one day be working at a university. I ended up joining the Army for a while. I was in the Army Reserves, where I served as a chaplain's assistant. And it was a good experience, and it helped give me some educational benefits that facilitated me returning back to school and then staying in. I graduated from UW River Falls in 2015, and one of the things that actually helped make my experience really positive over there is I was part of a fraternity, and that's going to be involved with my research, which I'll be talking about later. I thought I was going to be a teacher the whole way through. I majored in Spanish education, and I always thought that I was meant to be a teacher, that it was my calling, and that I was never going to do anything else. But as I approached graduation and student teaching, I realized that K-12 just really wasn't the best fit for me. That I saw a statistic my senior year that 50% of new teachers will drop out of the profession in their first 3 years. And I just knew in my heart that I was not in that top half. So I figured, why bother with the extra semester of student teaching? Why bother with the heartache and the hardship? Let's figure something else out. That long story led me towards graduate school, which brought me to St. Thomas for the first time. I got a master's degree in leadership and student affairs, and then a graduate internship at Century College, and then UW River Falls, and ended up being a full-time position here at St. Thomas, working with our veteran students. Well, one of the benefits of working at a university is you're able to take advantage of some of the benefits, one of which is the tuition remission. So after being here for about 5 years, I started the journey towards a doctoral program, and I continue working here to this day.
You've had a very twisty-turny, very rich academic journey, and now you are a doctoral candidate. Could
Yes.
you tell us a little bit about the research you're pursuing and what that's going to look like?
Yes. So early in the process of the doctoral program, we were encouraged to keep an open mind and not settle in on a research topic immediately. That maybe people have some ideas, but we were encouraged to, kind of just keep that in our back pockets. And that was really good for me because I went into the program having no idea what I wanted to conduct research on. I had so many topics that sounded interesting and caught my interest that I knew I'd probably would be very happy in pursuing. And I struggled for a little while to narrow it down, thinking that maybe there's a way I could Frankenstein some things together to put together all of my interests all in one and just make it absolutely perfect. But the world isn't perfect, and research that combines things from like 7 different fields probably isn't very feasible. So I ended up settling on the 2 topics that felt most interesting to me. I mentioned before I was a part of a fraternity in college, and also that when I was in the Army, I served as a chaplain's assistant. So I kind of put 2 of those interests together, and that's the research that I'm going to be beginning very soon. So the research that I'm going to be looking into is how fraternity members make meaning of their religious and spiritual development. And as I began the early stages of this, I felt very fortunate that there's been very little research in this subset of the population, in this phenomenon within fraternity members. And what has been conducted so far has been kind of just very quantitative in nature, leaving a door open towards doing some qualitative research in it. So that's what I'm planning on pursuing here very soon.
And with that process that you're in right now, kind of getting yourself ready to go conduct that research, have there been any challenges with that kind of lack of previous research, as you mentioned before? Or do you kind of plan on working around that by, I don't know, using different data sets, methods in order to collect data?
Yeah, so where I'm at in the process, I haven't actually begun doing the research itself to find the information that's out there. Throughout the research process in doctoral programs, there's different chapters of a dissertation, and the first 3 chapters combined are what's called a prospectus. So that's where I'm at right now. I just submitted a prospectus. I'm doing some edits for it, but those are chapters 1, 2, and 3 of a dissertation. And the biggest thing with finding the gap in research, so to speak, happened while conducting a literature review. So for those that are unfamiliar, a literature review involves finding everything that's been written, all the scholarly work that touches on the subject that you want to conduct research on. So in my case, that's everything involving fraternity involvement, everything involving spiritual development or religious involvement. And those are 2 just massive topics, right? And I found in time that there was a lot of research on fraternities. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of research on religion and spiritual development, but only just a tiny little bit on the intersection of those. So that presented a challenge and an opportunity. While looking at the literature review, I could go on and on and on about one topic, the other topic, but there really, because there wasn't very much on the intersection between them, it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's trailblazing, because it's fairly niche. And somebody has done it, but the style of research I'll be conducting in this area will be pretty new, which is very exciting, because pretty soon I'll be one of the world experts in this area.
Yeah, you're a trailblazer.
Thank you.
And I'm just curious, what do you hypothesize is the connection between being part of a fraternity and having religious development while you're there?
So I can tell you what the research has shown so far. Gentleman, last name Goldfarb, has done the research on this area so far. And what he's found so far is that the difference between what he calls affiliated and non-affiliated students is very minor. The only difference he found between fraternity members and non-affiliated members was that fraternity members actually had a slightly lower amount of connectedness, but every other thing that he tested for in his surveys was nearly equal, or it wasn't statistically significant. But being a quantitative sort of research, it wasn't really, it didn't beg the question of like collecting stories and finding the interplay of like how people are developing through these different stages, how people are experiencing tension. So that's where my research will hopefully fill in that gap and get the stories, get the personal feelings and anecdotes of the people that are going through this.
Wow. And then going forward, so now that you have kind of your foundation for what your research is going to look like, going forward, is there anything that you're really excited or looking forward to when you're kind of pursuing your research question?
Yes, I mean, it's very exciting. And if it wasn't, it would probably be a big problem at this point, because I spend more time thinking about this than just about anything in the world outside of my kids. So I'm very excited to connect with the students as part of this research. My research I'm planning on having it be coast to coast, so all throughout the United States, and connecting with different people from different backgrounds, different types of fraternities, different religions than me, different everything than me, and just hearing their stories, hearing how maybe their fraternity helped them develop in this really holistic way. Or maybe how they felt tension, and they felt times maybe that they've had to choose between them, and collecting those stories and then analyzing them and telling it back through data in a way that honors their experience and is true to what they say. So I'm really looking forward to that part. And with some luck, need to get some approvals. IRB approval is one thing, and I should be able to start doing that as early as this upcoming spring.
Would you say that your own journey, I know we've touched on it before, your own journey in academia and in a fraternity has kind of given you the perspective needed in order to study this very niche topic?
I think that it certainly has lended itself towards it quite a bit. I do think that anybody could do this. I don't think that I'm inherently smarter or more talented than anybody else, but being interested in this and having it so connected to who I am has definitely helped a lot. I grew up in I would say a relatively like mainline Christian household, but I was encouraged to, from an early age, make my spirituality my own and have what my family would call like a personal relationship with God. And I think from a pretty early age, I really have always thought that, we may not have all the answers, or like the Bible might not have all the answers, but if you're going to guess wrong while you're caring for people and while you're loving for people. And when in the little bit of studying that I've done about other religions in the world, wow, that sentiment really rings true in a lot of places. So I'm very open to, listening to other religions. I'm not going to necessarily convert, right? But hearing what other people have to say and honoring that and respecting it, I think is at the core of who I am. And I also mentioned my fraternity experience being very positive. I think sometimes when people think about fraternities, especially if they haven't experienced them a whole lot themselves, I think the first thing that comes to mind for many people are some of the negative stereotypes. And statistically, those do happen. Hazing does happen. Drinking does happen. A lot of times, like sexual assault, they do happen. But I was very lucky that the fraternity that I was involved with, those things were not happening. And I was surrounded by people that were very positive and really good influences. So I had what I think in some ways was the best type of religious upbringing in order to care and love people, and I had the best fraternity background. So possibly maybe my research can shed some light on how we can combine these positive experiences in order to transform fraternities and push society in a little bit of a better direction.
Okay, this one's a little off topic, so you can take some time, or we can cut this out if it doesn't work or whatever.
Bring it on, yes.
Your time in the military, did you see any kind of similarities between military life and a fraternity? Because I know often both are kind of associated with brotherhood, companionship. Did you see any similar patterns with spiritual development in those two?
So I think that there definitely are some parallels. I was in the Army Reserves, so you see all the ads on TV, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer, and that was my tempo for the most part. So in that respect, I was only seeing my comrades in arms, a few times a year, 12 weekends and, a couple weeks in the summer. So I personally didn't form those types of strong bonds with the people in the military. That being said, a lot of people who are serving on active duty, so where they're living and working everything all together, they do form those strong bonds. And I feel very blessed that I was able to get those strong bonds, those positive male to male like peer relationships through a fraternity. But it's not the only place that people can get them. The military can be a great place for many people, but also it's not for everybody. And just as fraternities can have toxic masculinity going on and some negative cultural things happening, those happen in the military sometimes as well. And I think the challenge for leaders is how to take the good and not take the bad out of that, because I think that there's probably some data that backs this up. There's a lot of evidence that good strong oversight from whether it's like a staff sergeant in the Army or student student life leadership at a university, that if they're cutting things off at the pass, so to speak, they can kind of take away some of those negative aspects while keeping the positive.
Great. And in your research at all, do you plan on looking at it from the leader's perspective in a sense where it's like kind of the leader's responsibility to foster that sense of community, that sense of fraternity in order to have those positive changes happen in the group that they're leading?
That's a really good question, and I think I'm early enough in the process that I haven't considered that as, the implications quite so much. It'll definitely have some implications for student affairs folks on how perhaps we can and should, foster fraternity dynamics. But I haven't gotten to that point yet. So I'm really interested in where everything will lead and what the data will say. Maybe there's some really large differences in the size of fraternity. This is just something that, like, a hypothesis that I have, is that smaller fraternities with, say, 25 or 30 or fewer people are less toxic, perhaps, than some of these massive fraternities that we hear about that have hundreds of people. But I don't know that yet. So that's just a kind of thought that I have, and we'll see where I want to remain true to the stories that I hear and the data that I find. And if what that says contradicts what I have to say, great. Then I'm willing to admit that I was wrong, and I just want to be true to the information that we find.
That's the exciting part, is that it's
Yeah.
the early stages now.
And I have so much to look forward to, and be able to start conducting research probably within just a couple of months here.
Exciting. Have you had any changes so far, or do you foresee any changes in how you're approaching your research question?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, I dropped out of college quite a few times as an undergrad. I actually took a year away from the doctorate program as well here. This time it wasn't financial aid related. I had twins born about 1 year into the program. So I knew right away that it would not be a very smart idea to try to continue chugging along with the program while I've got twin little ones at home. So I took a year off, and when I had left, I was really focused. I thought that my research approach was going to be through what's called a constructivist technique, how people kind of find meaning or create meaning. So I was stuck on that for this full year. I was away from school, and I was like, okay, we're going to go with constructivism, and that's how it's going to work. And it made so much sense to me. However, when I got back in school that following fall, the more I learned about constructivism and then more about something called phenomenology, it started kind of coming apart a little bit. So I went through, I wouldn't call it a crisis, but it kind of felt like a crisis, where I'm like, oh no, this assumption that I had for the last year plus, it's just not going to work. So I had to let that go and just be able to just put that behind me and think about my research in a different way. And now that I've kind of settled into phenomenology more, which is more about, like, what's happening to these people, like, that are all experiencing this thing, this religious and spiritual development amongst fraternity members. That was like a big curveball for me, and had I not taken the year away, I probably would have been able to adjust to it better than I did. But it really took a long time, and some pretty direct words from one of my professors to say, hey, maybe you should consider doing it this way. But once I did that, and I kind of got over my own pride, things got better, and my research started to make a lot more sense.
How do you settle on a framework to use? I know you mentioned before that you were planning on using kind of a constructivist framework to conduct your research. Is that just what you connected with in the moment, and then it changes over time? Mm-hmm. Or is it more of a method in which you collect the data and you say, okay, this is going to get me the result, the end goal that I want? How do you really decide?
Yeah, so there's all sorts of different approaches, and we were encouraged to explore all of them and see what one kind of works best with where we were heading. And this was only about a year into the program, so we were encouraged to read about them. So there's things like positivism and post-positivism, which is like what the research in fraternity spirituality is so far, like a very numbers-oriented statistical analysis that's really just by the numbers. There's constructivism and phenomenology, which are gathering more stories. But then there's also things like narrative inquiry and critical theory that are getting more into challenging assumptions that are out there. And we were encouraged to look at all of those and think, what are we going to be doing this on? Another thing that I was pretty sure for a while that I was going to do a mixed method study. But in time, I realized that the quantitative part of the study that I wanted to do differed enough from the qualitative that I was really probably just going to be conducting two completely different studies and trying to shoehorn them together. So that wasn't going to work. And once I kind of was able to move on from that and also move into phenomenology, think it just kind of, I don't want to say there was like a big aha moment, but it really made a lot more sense when I considered how the types of questions that I was planning on asking and how I was going to approaching things. And all of the books that we're reading in the program, because it is a doctorate program, there's a lot of reading. So you learn about the types of motivations and how these questions work and why they're designed that way. Mm-hmm. And that's leading into it kind of melds together with what I'm looking at doing. And I don't want to say like the clouds opened up and then I heard a voice from beyond, but it did start to make more sense. Mm-hmm. And I just needed to get over my own preconceived notions about how it was going to work. And it started to make more sense to me at that point.
Sounds like this involves a lot of flexibility.
It does. And also a lot of consultation with professors and advisors. And even though it's going to be my research and I'll be the expert on it, the professors in the doctorate program, they've helped a lot of people before me. And I'll give a big shout out to the entire educational leadership team of professors at St. Thomas. They've been really terrific. So thank you.
So from here on out, I know there's a lot of room for possible change, but from here on out, what do the next steps look like?
Yeah, so I submitted last week actually my prospectus, and I got some feedback that I needed to just do some editing and rework some things. So I'm working on that right now. So by the end of the summer, I hope to have my prospectus submitted and approved. So the class that I'm in right now is structured around providing support to submit the prospectus and have it ready to go. Prospectus, again, being the chapters 1, 2, and 3. So once I'm approved through my professor, my prospectus moves on to a blind review by two faculty that are in the EDD program. And once it passes through that check, then I'm free to register for some more classes. But if I don't pass this check, you go through the process again, and there's a lot more work still to be done. And it sounds a little bit scary, and maybe for some people it is, but there's a lot of support that's built in. And the program, they don't want you to fail. They want you to succeed. So I'll be able to move on for this fall and start working with, I'll identify a dissertation chair and working with that person to make sure that I'm getting so Institutional Review Board, IRB approval, so approval to work with human subjects. And from there, after getting IRB approval, you can start conducting the actual research, contacting students, contacting universities for me, doing interviews and collecting that data. So all of that should be happening in the next 6 months for me.
That'll be exciting. And I know you've already touched on this a little bit, but what do you hope the wider impact of your research is going to be?
Oh boy. I really hope that this research can help people. I mean, if nothing else, I want it to help people. And who those people are, I think that it can help fraternity members find more meaning in their religious and spiritual development. I hope that it can help fraternity leaders develop people in a more holistic way, finding ways to support people. We hear a lot of times about this epidemic of loneliness, especially among young men. And, that's happening despite religious institutions, fraternities, promising belonging and understanding and camaraderie. And we don't know necessarily what all of the root causes are, but we have lonely fraternity members. We have lonely religious people. So if we can find a way to kind of create some alignment between fraternity, religious development, college involvement, maybe we can help people find more meaning in their lives and find better connections with other people.
And in the future, do you think you'll plan to continue to kind of pursue this topic, or is there anything else that seems interesting that you might want to spend some time on?
If there's one thing that I've learned throughout my really roundabout academic journey is that you never know what the future brings. So I'm interested enough in this and I'm so in the weeds with it that I really can't imagine what another topic would look like. But I also never thought that I would get a master's degree or work at a university. So as for what the future might bring, I am purposely leaving everything just open, and I fully believe in journey before destination. So we'll see what the future has. Maybe I'll secure a job working in the future for a fraternity and bringing alignment between values and spirituality. Or maybe I'll find a way into the private sector. We'll see.
Flexibility. That's the overarching theme of this episode.
Yes. And whatever the future holds, I want to make sure that I'm always flexible and agile enough to be ready for it, and never know what's going to happen. So, but I think the future is bright.
All right, Nick, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
The Professor Podcast is brought to you by the St. Thomas Libraries. I'm your host, Sarah Brings. The producers and library staff are Mary Davidson and Andrea Kepi. Thank you so much for our guests and to you, our listeners.